I am here to talk about the four-letter word of OSHA and try and give you an outlook of kind of where it's been and where it's going. I'm going to do my best here. I like starting out with a little bit of data, and this is the most recent data. It's going to say 2023, but it is the most recent data. The 2024 data should be coming out soon. But why do we have OSHA? You're going to maybe hear me talk out both sides of my mouth today about OSHA, but they do serve a very good purpose. So over the last handful of years, there's been about 5,200 give or take fatalities. And when you look at it, and whenever I talk to employees, this puts things in perspective. It's about 1 every 99 minutes. So think about the time that just we're in the conference room today. When we talk about construction specifically, it is one of the highest markers for fatality. So what we do, what our people do, is very dangerous. And then when we look at construction even more specifically, falls are that leading indicator and cause of fatalities within the construction industry. Always has been, and I think it always will be until we start kind of taking this seriously. And I'm going to show you kind of where OSHA is focused on as well. Really kind of quickly again, just to show you where it's been over the last 5 years. Numbers kind of dipped in 2020 for obvious reasons, less people working, less people out there. But again, for the most part, around that kind of 52 to 50, kind of 300 fatalities every year. And then also kind of show you where some of those fatalities are happening. Transportation, oddly, is one of the highest causes of fatalities. So one thing that is often overlooked, and there aren't really any OSHA regulations around it, but when we look at our trucking industry, that's one area, but we often forget as a construction industry how many vans or how many trucks we have on the road and getting to and from job sites. So we talked about the nuclear incidents that happen on the claim side, but also on the comp side with those injuries related to vehicles. So a big thing. Contact incidents, workplace violence has always been in the top 5. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later as well. And then again, you look at the industries, construction is really one of our highest and most dangerous industries that we work in. So again, a great reason kind of why I'm here. Now I'm going to kind of talk about the landscape of OSHA here. Here's my disclaimer. This is not a political discussion by any means. I'm going to talk about previous administrations. I don't care. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back a little bit in time because it helps set the stage for where we're at now. And it's going to show you kind of where OSHA's been and where they're going and kind of the up and down, if you will, of the different administrations and how they view OSHA. When Obama came in, when that administration came in, it changed the landscape of OSHA as I knew it. My background, like Jose said, is about 30 years in safety. I worked in manufacturing. I worked on the insurance broker side for 10 years. I started up Vista about 11 years ago, and I've seen about all industries. I always kind of joke, we do a lot of construction work, a ton of construction work. I always joke that my weirdest client is a crematory. Odd. My coolest client is Virgin Galactic, the spaceship people. So we really see a lot of different industries. But as far as I know, OSHA changed is really kind of under that administration. We saw less focus on education and really more on enforcement. And as he did, he pledged to put enforcement back in the Department of Labor, and we saw it. We saw a ton of new regulatory items. Everything from the silica standard to electronic record keeping, which is due coming up. If you're not familiar with OSHA record keeping your OSHA logs, find me after. Hazard communication, silica, walking and working surfaces for general industry. We saw a ton of new enforcement action items there. The other thing we saw back in 2016, OSHA raised their penalties about 78%. So you saw that what a penalty used to be back in the day, about $7,000, it flipped up in 2016 to about $12,471, and where it's sitting currently is $16,500. And again, in the next couple weeks, we're going to see that tick up a little bit more to stay in line with the consumer price index. So it's going to go up. Now, two things I'm not going to focus on. This is a whole nother presentation. But you see other than serious or a serious violation is that 16.5. It starts there, and then there's reductions based off the size of the company, the gravity or seriousness of the hazard, etc. Whether it's fall protection or a paperwork standard, it can start at that 16.5. Once you have that first one, it stays on your permanent record, so to speak, for 5 years. So if you have a fall protection hazard, or citation, I should say, 5 years, it stays on your permanent record. If OSHA comes back out to another job site, I don't care if you're working in in Glenview or you're working in Bartlett, it stays with the company. It can be a repeat as much as $165,000. So again, the bar elevates really quickly, and I've seen some really high citation penalties over the last handful of years. When Trump came in the first time, OSHA changed a little bit, not as much as everybody thought. The real problem was Trump could not get an OSHA boss confirmed. OSHA sits in the Department of Labor. It's the Assistant Secretary of Labor that runs OSHA. He could never, after about 2/3 of his administration, could never get someone confirmed in that position. So really, there wasn't any total political direction pushed all the way down, even locally here in our local Chicago offices. So the local Chicago offices and OSHA inspectors said, well, no one's really given us a lot of political direction and where to take this, so we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. Again, from that last administration. So there were some slight changes with, again, some regulatory rollbacks and pauses on things, but again, not a lot changed. Biden rolled in, and then it kind of really jumped almost back to the Biden era. And kind of what we saw is that increased enforcement. And I'll tell you, the last 4 years, our kind of OSHA response, if you will, with our businesses, or within Vista Safety shot up through the roof. We probably helped clients with close to about 100 OSHA investigations last year, or over the just last year alone. So it through the roof. So what we saw was more inspections. Well, as a result of more inspectors, their budget was increased. So we saw more locally inspectors, which resulted in more inspections. Continuously high penalties. We saw an expansion of an instance by instance penalty. So what that means is that normally if OSHA comes to a job site and sees 4 guys not wearing hard hats, they give you typically 1 penalty. What they could do, and I saw this once, it's not enforced a lot, but they can do the math by giving penalty, 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 penalty. And again, math-wise, it goes kind of through the roof. So we saw kind of some funny math, if you will, in kind of their calculations of how the penalty is derived. We saw a focus on repeat citations, getting that first one stuck on the wall and making a return trip. So we really saw some increased enforcement there. The big thing we saw was a renewed focus on what they call emphasis programs. OSHA can do a lot of drive-bys. It's what we're really kind of known for in construction, is that OSHA will come out and see somebody working up on a roof, not tied off or on a top deck, stop and open an inspection. The emphasis programs are focused on very specific hazards in very specific industries. So silica. Excavation was a big one the last handful of years. I mean, if they saw an inspection, they necessarily didn't even need to see an issue. They would stop and open up an inspection. So really an focus on emphasis programs, and then also a focus on your record keeping. Again, record keeping, your OSHA logs are due February 1st, March 2nd to report them online. If you don't know what that is, again, see me afterwards. But we saw a focus on high penalties with OSHA record keeping, as well as with non-reporting serious injuries in the tune of sometimes $8,000 to $11,000 penalties for not reporting a serious injury. Serious injury is a hospitalization, amputation, or a loss of an eye, or a fatality as well. But super high penalties coming out of, again, the reporting issues. And then also what we saw was some change to a language called the worker walk-around designation process or rule. So again, it could allow for a third party to be part of your private OSHA investigation. So again, good or bad, however you spin it, there was a lot of activity. So where have we seen it now? So with Trump kind of rolling in 2.0, he's confirmed an OSHA boss recently, just as of this past October. So we do have an OSHA boss in place. Penalty amounts, as I alluded, will go up again a little bit. The budget for this year is still a little bit in flux. So OSHA runs off of a fiscal year, October to September. Still have not seen a formal budget yet. The Senate is promoting pushing a level budget, which is actually really good. The House is looking for about approximately 8% cut. So we'll kind of see where that goes. If you asked me a year ago where I would see this, I would say, yeah, things are going to really change. Who he's put into place as an OSHA boss, I'm feeling it's going to be pretty level. I thought a lot of things were going to get cut. So during the Biden era, there was a lot of talk, and we saw it, emphasis on heat stress. OSHA had a focus on heat stress, an emphasis program. No standard, it was hard for them to enforce it. And you asked me a year ago if that would be in a place, I'd say, nope, that's getting killed, it's getting tossed. The current administration is still pushing forward with a formal heat stress standard. I think what the initial kind of the initial regulation that I saw, super complicated. I think it will be thinned out a little bit, but I really think that we're going to still see that. There's still going to be, I think, potentially a focus on workplace violence, however that standard looks like. Can OSHA issue a citation for it? They can, but it's issued under what they call the general duty clause. But I think there could be some other state programs. California has some very specific standards on workplace violence, and we as a federal, and Illinois sits in a federal OSHA, could start to adopt some of those. The other good things that I've seen out of the administration is it's reduced penalties for small businesses, which I think is fair. Over the last few years, I've seen some small employers get really dinged by maybe a forgetful moment by one of their employees and then get slapped with a very kind of heavy fine. And it's tough. It's tough for me. Yes, safety is important, but it's tough for me to see a small business owner have to pay a $25,000 fine because of an issue. So there are some reductions from an OSHA standpoint in how the calculations are to small businesses. And then I think we're going to see, again, kind of a slight shift from compliance to more education and again, a little bit away from that kind of punitive, kind of heavy hammer. So is what I'm projecting. You asked me again, like I said, a year ago, I thought it would have been a bigger shift, but I think it's going to be a little bit more level, which is good, is how it should be. Now, as that pedal is, the foot is coming off the pedal a little bit, it's not really the time, and I'm telling all of my contractors, it's not the time to ignore safety. For my subcontractors in the room, I am still seeing very, very stringent requirements by general contractors. So you can't ignore it. So all the training that you're supposed to be doing, all the programs you're supposed to be doing, general contractors are still requiring high standards. And who you're working with, if you're working with some of the really big GCs, you kind of know that pain. I mean, they're putting you through ringers on safety, right? For my general contractors in the room, if you're working for owners, I've seen owner requirements just as stringent. Some ownership, property owners to developers are pushing safety down. And then again, there's insurance, right? So yeah, as Traveler spoke, worker comp is flat, which is great, but again, for Jose to do a job to sell you to Travelers or to any market for that matter, your safety needs to be above par, right? Your experience mod needs to be in a manageable place. It needs to be controlled. You need to be doing some preventative measures to keep it under control. Can I get an amen? Amen. Right? From where OSHA's looking at, a top 10 most frequently cited, this is kind of where some of your focus as a whole construction industry, your room should be looking at, right? Fall protection, ladders, scaffolds, fall protection again, PPE. Number 6, safety training and specifically inspections. This gets so often forgotten about within the construction industry, is inspections are required. So you have to be doing safety inspections, whether you use us, whether you use your carrier partner, or whether you're doing it yourself. Make sure you're documenting safety inspections. And then you see fall protection up there a third time. What that means is when there is a fall protection hazard and somebody's not wearing their harness, OSHA can cite up to 3 different citations because the person's not wearing it, they're probably not trained, and there's probably no program. So that, again, penalty racks up really quickly. And then silica. Now that's to the general, kind of all of us in the room. My one tip to you, takeaway, and this, I think we're giving this presentation, or I'm happy to send it to you if you leave your card, is if you go on OSHA's website, click on Help and Resources. For a governmental website, it's actually pretty good. You click on Data and Statistics. Pulls up this. You can punch in your specific NAICS code. And I punched in one for plumbing and HVAC, hit Submit, and it will pull up your personal top 10. So maybe your one small takeaway from today is if you were to go back to your office, pull this up. Now, if I'm a plumbing contractor, I'm going to look and I want to make sure I'm really tightened up in those top 5 areas. because I know any new OSHA inspector is going to come out with this in their back pocket, and that's what they're speaking to if they're going to be looking at you. So really kind of focused on where to start if you don't know where to take it. And last but not least, kind of where do you go? This is kind of, if you're confused about where to start, and I see this with a lot of small companies, how do I start this process? A couple things. It's always good to start with a mock audit. That's something we do on a regular basis. Start with a gap analysis or mock OSHA audit. Figure out that baseline. We'll tell you the worst of the worst, and then we can kind of narrow it down to what your top 5 is. Evaluate your OSHA logs. Look at your injuries over the last 3 years. Where have you been having those injuries? Look at your loss runs. Make sure your health and safety programs are up to date and focused on you. One of the biggest problems I see when I go into new customers, their safety program is huge and it says things they're not doing. It overexposes them. Only have it in there what you should be doing and what your exposures are. Make sure you're doing those safety inspections I alluded to. Make sure you're conducting safety training on a regular basis, documented. I don't care if you're talking about safety for 55 minutes or 5 minutes. Document it. All that documentation is important. And last but not least, and this is big, every OSHA situation or investigation I'm involved with, OSHA will ask for disciplines. I always kind of say that 99% of my clients have a discipline program. 99.9% of them don't effectively enforce it. You have to enforce your discipline program. Between us in this room and the camera, I don't care what that looks like, but you have to document it. So many times people say that they have that verbal warning. It's a verbal, but it's not documented. Call it a first warning, a second warning, but everything has to be documented. If you're doing these things up on this board, up on this slide, in theory, we've gotten clients out of it. If you're doing all of these things and an OSHA cites one of your employees or sees one of your employees for not doing, there is a very small window for employee negligence or employee misconduct. And OSHA will throw out that citation. If you're doing all these, again, 99.9% of the time where it falls apart is the disciplines. We all say we do it. We all have one. I could promise you, if I had a show of hands, we're probably all not doing a good job of it. It doesn't have to be a heavy hand, but in OSHA's eyes, if you're not enforcing it, it's all for nothing. So with that, how did I do on time? Good, I talk fast, good. Okay.